Chapter 13, Mother Ocean, the final chapter. I was released 3 months after the DNA evidence showed that I had been excluded as a suspect in the murder of Amy Pilford. The local sheriff of the little town that had been my home had an immediate press conference, stating that they felt they had the right man, but now with the results from the DNA in hand, they would conduct an exhaustive search for the suspect. Their search took about 72 hours. Sam Biggs was the man who was working that snowy night when mine and Amy's paths had crossed. Amy had given me $10, then mentioned that she had forgot to get her husband's beef jerky. As I left, she was returning back into the little store. Sam had been watching. He had been watching Amy for months, and this was his moment. He kept a small wooden bat behind the counter in case of robberies. As Amy found the beef jerky and then made her way to the counter, Sam made his move. He didn't want to kill her outright. He just wanted to knock her out. But as he swung the bat, Amy had flinched, and he had caught her in the mouth, knocking out both of her 2 front teeth. Sam then hurried from around the counter as poor Amy moaned on the floor, holding her bleeding mouth. Sam quickly gathered some rope and tied and gagged her. He took her out the back door of the store and placed her in the trunk of his car and returned inside to clean up the little blood on the floor. He then returned to his duties until closing time. Within a short while, Amy's husband arrived searching for Amy. That was when Sam came up with his story about me. He knew that if he turned the cops onto my path, they would believe that I had kidnapped her because of my criminal past. He closed the store at 11:30. Todd, Amy's husband, was still there in his truck as other police officers had joined him. Sam then jumped into his car and drove Amy, still in the trunk, out to the field next to the high school where he raped and killed her, leaving her body to be found the next morning by the 2 young boys. When Sam heard about the DNA evidence, he placed a 911 call and then put a .357 Magnum in his mouth and blew his brains out. In a letter he had left behind, he stated that he had killed his first victim 7 years before he killed Amy, a prostitute that worked at a nearby truck stop, and dumped her body in the river. After Amy, he had killed a 14-year-old runaway, keeping her hostage at his home for almost a month before he stabbed her to death and buried her in a shallow grave in the woods. The case was finally closed, and I went home to be with my mother. I filed a lawsuit against the local police department and the DA, and my lawyer settled the case out of court. I received a settlement of $212,000 after taxes and attorney fees. My mother, Alice, died a year after my release of a stroke. I was living with her in our little house and found her unresponsive one Tuesday morning. I had her cremated and placed her urn on the cabinet above our television in the living room. After my mother's death, I determined that it was time that I left the woods behind. That final day, I remember standing on the back porch where I sat as a child staring up into those dark woods. Today, the nightmare was over. There was no longer anything left to fear in those woods. I visited Zip's grave a final time where my mother buried him 6 years after I had been incarcerated. She had told me that little Zip had just lost his zeal for life after I had gone and laid for hours staring up into the woods as if he was waiting for me to come home. When I was raped in those woods, the person who I'd been never re-emerged from those trees. Who knows what would have happened to me if I had not been assaulted. Maybe I would have gotten married to a local girl and had a few kids and worked as a manager at the local gas station. Who knows? The little house was silent as I closed the door for the last time and stood there in the dirt driveway, looking at the place that had been my home most of my life. The wind was blowing slightly and the pines were swaying back and forth. Off in the distance I could hear the calls of the crows. My time in the woods was ending, and I knew at that moment I would never see the little shack again. I headed south to Florida. I left the mountains far behind. I wanted to see the ocean that I had dreamt about in my prison cell. The ocean was the ultimate goal of a man kept locked in a cell. It was such a large place, such a free place, both dangerous and comforting. I drove all night and it was slightly raining when I arrived in the Keys that morning. I parked my car near the beach under some palms as the rain had moved past, leaving only a slight drizzle behind. I walked through the early morning light barefoot across the sand right up to the edge of the crashing waves. I sat right down on the sand, placing my mother's urn next to me. For a long moment I just listened to the crashing of the waves, the cries of the gulls, the swishing of the palm fronds. All my life had led up to this moment. All those years in my cell, and finally I was here. Mother Ocean was calling me, wanting to wrap her arms around me. I had my money from my lawsuit, but I was alone. Rose was long gone. My mother had passed. Even the person I used to be had disappeared. I remember hearing that the ocean has no memory. In the water I could fly. In the waves I could dance. I left my mother's urn on the beach and walked out into the waves up to my knees. I reached down, placing my hand in the water, and then brought it up to taste the salt. I looked out across the vast, reaching ocean just as the sun was beginning to raise her head up over the horizon. I then began to swim in the direction of that rising sun. As golden sparkles danced and shone on the undulating ocean, I swam towards the golden light. Mother Ocean had me in her loving hand. She had no memory of my past sins, and she was caressing me in her loving grasp. The gulls glided on the unseen wind current above me, as the light from the rising sun was chasing away the blackness of the night sky. Still I swam. Up ahead I could see one final star that seemingly refused to flee from the oncoming of the sun's light. The one star did not rage against the dying of the light, but in my mind she celebrated the coming of the light. Fear was a darkness that could suffocate a man and keep him lost in darkness for 1,000 years. But light could set him free. I was that star that welcomed the emerging light, even if it meant my time in the darkness was finished. Because I was no longer a creature of the light. I was a creature of the dark. Mother Ocean knew this, and she held me in her hand and baptized me in her salty kiss. Now it was time to float away on the currents. I turned over onto my back and stared up into the bluish-black sky. "Mother," I whispered, "I am home." A little girl looked down at the blue and white flowered metal urn that lay half buried in the sand. "Mom, what's this?" The woman removed her sunglasses as her daughter handed her the urn. "I think it's an urn, baby," the woman said as she dusted the sand off the object. It says Alice Anderson," the woman said as the last of the sand was blown away by the breeze. The woman turned and looked out into the ocean. She then looked back up the beach. "Someone must have forgotten this," she said. "Come on," she said to her daughter. "Let's take it over to the lifeguard station," the woman said as the two of them headed back up where the cars were parked beneath the palms. Mother Ocean, how I have dreamt of you. In my nightly slumber, I have seen your blue. I have felt your winds blow and tasted your salty kiss. In your heart you hold unseen wonders, too numerous to list. When all the stars have burned out and only the darkness is left, I know that you, my mother, will not leave me bereft. In the depths of your watery heart in canyons deep, your love for me will be waiting in a never-ending sleep. For you, my mother Ocean, is a silent keeper of dreams, desires, and fears, calling out to the seeker. I am floating, gentlemen and ladies, in the endless void. My spirit and my soul have been destroyed. O Mother Ocean, close my eyes once more. Keep me forever in your hands and far away from the shore. The end.